Hello, and welcome to the Your Love Ministries podcast with Pam Baggett and me, Brenda Porch. Now, in our last two podcasts, we've been reading and discussing the amazing story of a brave young woman named Esther. Now, if you haven't heard the first couple of ones, you probably want to go back because there's a lot of ground to cover. And so today I'm just going to say that there was a man named Haman who thinks he's got the upper hand because of his hatred of Mordecai. He's got this big plan to get all the Jews destroyed. But Esther has a plan. And so we're going to see who wins. Now, he's been to one feast that Esther gave just for him and the king. So his head is so big he can barely get it through the door. He's got this great plan to build this massive gallows to hang Mordecai on, which is the cousin that raised Esther. And now he's getting invited to a second banquet, which only the king and himself are invited to. So let's see what happens. Pam, can you get us going?
Okay, there is a Yiddish saying, der Mensch sagt und Gott lacht. Now, everybody that knows Yiddish, forgive me for all the ways I mangled that, but that's the best I could do. It's become popular in English. In that version, it says, a man plans and God laughs.
Yes.
But there is a scripture that predates the saying, and I think it applies well to what is about to happen to Haman. Psalm 37, 12-13 says, the wicked plots against the just and gnashes at him with his teeth. The Lord laughs at him, for he sees that his day is coming.
Wow.
And that's what we're going to see in today's lesson. There is
Very
a day
appropriate.
coming.
Very appropriate. Okay.
Okay. Esther 6, verses 1-9. That night the king could not sleep. So one was commanded to bring the book of the records of the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. And it was found written that Mordecai had told of Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs, the doorkeepers who had sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. Then the king said, what honor or dignity has been bestowed on Mordecai for this? And the king's servants who attended him said, nothing has been done for him. So the king said, who is in the court? Well, now Haman had just entered the outer court of the king's palace to suggest that the king hang Mordecai on the gallows that he had prepared for him. Starting to laugh here, right? The king's servants said to him, Haman is there standing in the court. And the king said, let him come in. So Haman came in, and the king asked him, what shall be done for the man whom the king delights to honor? Now Haman thought in his heart, whom would the king delight to honor more than me? And Haman answered the king, well, for the man whom the king delights to honor, let a royal robe be brought, which the king has worn, and a horse on which the king is ridden, which has a royal crest placed on its head. And then let this robe and horse be delivered to the hand of one of the king's most noble princes, that he may array the man whom the king delights to honor. And then honor him on horseback through the city square and proclaim before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. Then the king said to Haman, hurry, take the robe and the horse as you've suggested, and do so for Mordecai the Jew, who sits within the king's gate. Leave nothing undone of all that you've spoken. I can't read this passage without hearing God laughing about it. Haman is feeling so pleased with himself as he plans to destroy Mordecai and all his people. He believes he can talk the king into approving the plan, but he doesn't know that the night before the king couldn't sleep, so he had someone read to him from the Chronicles of his reign. And the passage that's read just happens to be the one that tells about a time when Mordecai saved the king from two conspirators who would have attacked the king. Now, realizing that nothing had been done to thank Mordecai, the king wants to change that. So Haman is coming into the palace as the king calls to see who's available to help with the situation. God's timing is always perfect, isn't it? The king asks for Haman's advice about how to honor someone. Haman thinks he's the one to be honored, so he describes the way he would like to be paraded around in public as a real celebrity. Imagine his face when he learns he has to serve Mordecai and honor him publicly. It's so funny. After having to lead Mordecai around, he runs home and whines to his wife like a child. The one detail is really interesting to me. The king knows that Mordecai is a Jew, but he had signed the decree that would allow all the Jews to be killed, which was Haman's grand plan.
Right.
But I looked back at chapter 3, and it seems the king trusted Haman's statement that certain people were a threat to the empire. So I don't see him telling the king that certain people were the Jews.
Oh, so he held back that little tidbit of information as to who these people were. And I think it's hilarious. I can just, I'm sorry, but I think it's hilarious. I can just see Haman guiding the horse around with Mordecai sitting there all decked out and looking really royal and saying, "This is what happens to the man who pleases the king." And can't you just know that he's just gritting
Oh,
his teeth through it all?
his blood pressure. Whoa, had to be crazy.
And then as soon as he goes home, he wants to tell his wife about it. And I think he's probably looking for one of those, poor baby. You had a
Yeah.
bad day,
Oh, honey
and
bun.
and they shouldn't have done that to you. And you were all completely right. But let's see what scripture tells us happened in Esther chapter 6, verses 13 and 14. 13 says, when Haman told his wife Zeresh and all his friends everything that had happened to him, his wise men and his wife Zeresh said to him, if Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of Jewish descent, you will not prevail against him, but will surely fall before him. So what is that saying? If this guy's a Jew, you don't stand a chance. You're going to
Mhm.
lose this battle. And then 14 says, while they were still talking with him, the king's eunuchs came and hastened to bring Haman to the banquet which Esther had prepared. So I'm kind of thinking maybe Haman's thinking, well, that was bad, but now I get to start feeling good about myself because, yeah, I had to do all that, but now I get to go to the second banquet just for me and the king. So I'm wondering if later on he may wish that he had listened to his wife and his wise men, but that is not what he did. Um, I just wonder they called them wise men, and the wife is talking about you will not prevail, you'll fall before him. Do you, do you think they knew about the Jewish people and had heard all the stories that how God had worked through his people, Pam? What do you think they got that information?
Well, they may have heard about God and his people, or God may have just been using them to supply a prophecy about what was going to happen. I don't know. And wise men, I think I may be wrong about in this case, I don't know, but a lot of times it seems like wise men for a ruler or someone important, um, basically the guys that they just figured out to make a panel out of, to advise them on things. It may or may not have been real wisdom, but they were expected to be wise. So I don't know
Well,
what
they
this
were
real
giving
wisdom
wise,
was.
but they were giving wise advice, but they weren't saying what Mordecai wanted. I mean, Haman wanted to hear.
And they
So
weren't really saying what they had said before to him when they were advising him.
I know
So they
last
shifted
time it was
gears.
like, yeah, build a gallows. And then when they found out it's the Jews, it's like, oh, you're
They
talking
had to
about
know
the
it was the
Jews.
Jews. When they were talking about it, they had to know that it was the Jews. I'm wondering if God didn't sort of get in their little heads and use their mouths.
Mm, yeah, I guess so.
I don't know. We don't get to know that one. We could add to
Yeah,
the
we
list
don't
of
get
questions
we
to ask
don't
them.
get all those details, and that's okay. If God thought we needed to know, we would know. But I
Yeah,
still
that's
think
true.
that we got enough
To make it fun.
make it enjoyable. All right. So in chapter 7, Haman shows up to eat with just the king and Esther. And once again, the king asked Esther to tell him what she wants. Now, this king loved her so much. Remember, he was offering her up to half of his kingdom. And I love the way that Esther requests what she says for her request in verses 3 and 4. First, she asked for the life for her life. I need to be saved. Then she asked for the life of her people. So let's read verse 4 together. For we have been sold, my people and I, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. Had we been sold as male and female slaves, I would have held my tongue, although the enemy could have never compensated for the king's loss. Look how clever she was. She knows how much the king loves her. And so, first, she brings it out that it's going to cost her her life. And then it's going to cost her the life of the people. But also, she's pointing out to the king that when you lose all these people, when they are destroyed, it's going to be a great loss to you. So I'm losing out, my family is losing out, and you, O king, are going to lose out as well. So she is pushing every emotional button this king has.
She is. And she does it in such a great way. She's shown humility before,
Mm-hmm.
and she's showing it now. Her respectful and submissive attitude worked with the man who was responsible for the virgins, and it worked with the king, and now it's working too. Let's look at starting verse 5 to 10, chapter 7. So King Ahasuerus answered and said to Queen Esther, who is he and where is he who would dare presume in his heart to do such a thing? And Esther said, the adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. So Haman was terrified before the king and queen. I would expect that, yes. Then the king arose in his wrath from the banquet of wine and went into the palace garden, and Haman stood before Queen Esther, pleading for his life, for he saw that evil was determined against him by the king. When the king returned from the palace garden to the place of the banquet of wine, Haman had fallen across the couch where Esther was. And then the king said, will he also assault the queen while I am in the house? As the words left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. And Harbona, one of the eunuchs, said to the king, look, the gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good on the king's behalf, is standing in the house of Haman. And the king said, hang him on it. So the king's wrath subsided. King is so mad that he has to leave the room to process what he's just learned.
Yes.
His most trusted servant conspiring to kill the queen and her people. Outrageous. And Haman's pouty, childish behavior continues as he approaches Esther to beg for his life. He's even thrown himself on the couch where she is. Timing is everything, and his is lousy. The king comes back in as this part of the tantrum happens. It looks like he's being very inappropriate with Esther. Bye-bye, Haman.
Yeah, I appreciated the fact that the king did not immediately react. He left the room and he thought about what Esther had said. And if he had any doubt in his mind at all when he came back in that room and saw Haman laying across the couch, that sealed the deal right there.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of ironic in a way, and funny too, because that wasn't Haman's intent. His intent was he was literally begging for his life. But Esther's not going to say anything else. She is, like you said, very humble, very respectful. It's very easy to see why the king would love her the way that he did, and why the man that was over the virgins earlier on in the story had respect for her and helped her and gave her the best of things, because she was doing things the right way. So let's keep going. Poor Haman is going to be hung on the gallows he built for his number one enemy, Mordecai.
Poor Haman. You don't mean poor Haman.
Do what?
You don't mean poor Haman. You know that.
That's my sarcastic. Poor Haman. All right. So Esther chapter 8, verses 1 and 2. On that day, King Xerxes gave Queen Esther the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told how he was related to her. So the king took off his signet ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther appointed Mordecai over the house of Haman. So Mordecai has now gone from somebody sitting at the king's gate to someone who's been paraded through the city, saying this is what happens to a man who is, does well for the king. And now he's being handed the signet ring, and Esther appointed him over the house of Haman. So can you kind of explain to us in that culture what all of those things meant?
Well, it's all about authority. A signet ring is used to authorize something. Today, you might have a notary public who will make a document official by signing it and then using a device to imprint a stamp on the signature. The signet ring was used to do something similar. And having the king's signet ring means that he was trusting them with the authority to publish a document in the king's name. Now, he did that with Haman, and it backfired on him. He let him have that kind of authority. But he's doing it again because he's trusting Mordecai and Esther with this. The house of someone would involve their wealth, their property, their social standing. In other words, everything Haman owned is now Mordecai's. Haman's family are also under his authority.
Oh, really? So now Mordecai, a Jew, someone that Haman hated, is now the wife, and all these wise men and the family and all that is now under Mordecai's authority. Wow, that's a lot in a short period of time. So now we know that Haman is gone and Mordecai has great power in the kingdom, but we still have a problem. The king sent out a decree saying that the Jews were to be destroyed on this particular day. And can he just send out something that says, you know what? I changed my mind. We're not going to have any Jew killing today, or what do you think is going to happen? But Esther, this is the first time that we've seen extreme emotion from Esther, because she's been very respectful and very cunning and very wise in how she got Haman out of the way and put Mordecai back in power. But now she's actually crying at the feet of the king and begging for the lives of her people. Because just because Haman is gone doesn't mean the threat for the people is also gone. Because this, as you said, this edict, this command went out on official king paper with the signet ring, so it was official. And so now they got a problem. So Pam, what's going to happen next?
Okay, well, here's what the king says after he understands the plight of Esther and the Jews in Esther 8:8. You yourselves write a decree concerning the Jews as you please in the king's name and seal it with the king's signet ring. For whatever is written in the king's name and sealed with the king's signet ring, no one can revoke. And we've seen that other parts of the Old Testament where when Mede-Persian law is set up, that once a law was in place, it couldn't be undone. So a king that made a bad law can't just cancel it out. It's there and has to be done. So it's a little confusing here about why the king didn't just write it themselves and why they didn't just sorry folks, there's been a change of plans, no Jew killing. That's your line. I guess I was taking over what you're going to do, but this
No,
is really
no,
cool.
that's what I just said a minute ago. No, I mean,
It's
that's
just,
how I'm thinking,
well,
just say the Jew
once that law's
killing
in
has
place,
been canceled.
they can't just cancel it. So they have to think of a new decree, and he lets them do it. After the new decree was set out, and they did write something different that was going to give the Jews the right to defend themselves in any way they wanted to. Instead of being killed by these people that were hitting and whatever, they were allowed to kill their enemies and take and plunder everything they had.
So before, and of course, I don't, you may not know the answer to this question, but before with the first edict, they wouldn't have been able to defend themselves. They just,
they would just been killed. Because these guys were going to have authority over them, and they could do what they wanted in the towns, and there was decrees saying it was okay.
I see.
Now they've got authority to attack the ones that might attack them.
I see.
So
Okay.
they can kill all these guys. All right. So the new decree's gone out, and so everybody's got the right to do what they need to protect themselves. In Esther 8:15-17, we've got, so Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal apparel of blue and white with a great crown of gold and a garment of fine linen and purple. And the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad. The Jews had light and gladness, joy and honor. And in every province and city, wherever the king's command and decree came, the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a holiday. Then many of the people of the land became Jews because fear of the Jews fell upon them. That was a new term.
Sure, I understand they became Jews.
It would be proselytes. Even in Jesus' time, there were some people who had chosen to follow the Jewish faith, even though they weren't born Jews.
I see. So now the people, there's been a decree sent out saying that you can defend yourself and you can take whatever possessions these people had, you can have
Right.
those. So now the day has come, and the king knows what's going on. He knows who the good guys and the bad guys are. The edict has gone out, the decree with giving them permission to fight. And so we're getting to the end of the story. I'm rooting for the good guys here. Esther chapter 9, verse 1 says, now in the 12th month, and I love it the way that the Bible gives such detail. It's amazing to me. Now in the 12th month, that is the month of Adar, on the 13th day, the time came for the king's commands and his decree to be executed. On the day that the enemies of the Jews had hoped to overpower them, the opposite occurred, in that the Jews themselves overpowered those who hated them. So the Jews, with permission, they have risen up. They have overcome all those that are trying to kill them. And it wasn't just a small skirmish. We're not talking about just a handful of people. In fact, chapter 9, verse 6 tells us that, and the Shushan, the citadel, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men. So 500 men were killed. And then it tells us that this also included the 10 sons of Haman. And so not only is Haman dead, but now his 10 sons were dead as well. Wow, that must have been a battle, because we talked about Africa and all these other places that his territory covered. That was just the numbers from that one place.
Mhm.
Yeah, so that was a very bloody day.
It
All right,
was.
so, but it says that it was the citadel of the Jews. So can
No,
you
Citadel of Shushan. It was not just of the
citadel
Jews.
of Shushan? Oh, okay. So I guess I don't know what a citadel is. Can you help
Well, it's
me
a
out with that?
fortress. It's a fortress. It's usually really high up to defend or control a city.
Mm.
So it's a
It'd be like
it
a
was
fort,
fort-
maybe, like we have
kind of a
forts.
fortified palace. It was a palace with king there, but it was fortified as a
Okay.
protection. He was safe there.
Okay.
Shushan was one of the capitals of his empire. There
Mhm.
were 4 capitals. And the Jews in Shushan wanted one more day to have authority to kill their enemies, and the king granted it. They had a lot of enemies there. But I think it's interesting that the Jews used the new decree to kill those who wanted to kill them, but they also were authorized to take plunder from their enemies, but they didn't do that.
Hmm.
They didn't do it in Shushan. They didn't do it anywhere. That they had the right to just take everything. They didn't do it.
I think it's interesting that they're like, okay, you gave us permission to fight once, but we need another day to get this mess cleared up. So that also tells me that even after that day of fighting, there were still people who were attempting to kill the Jews, or at least they thought they would attempt to. Don't you? I mean, is that a reasonable?
I think it is. I think that, especially at Shushan, where Haman and others were so strong and evidently hateful toward the Jews, there may have been little pockets of them still to be found and rooted out, get all the rats out of the corners of the cellar type
Yeah.
thing. So they may have still been there hiding and ready to try something if they had a chance again.
All right. Well, this amazing story is almost over, but the rest of the story I find kind of interesting. Now, the Jews have always been very mindful of their past, and these stories are passed down from generation to generation. And I know a few Jews now that they do a lot of celebrating, and the kids are taught a lot about the history of the Jewish nation. And so now they are going to actually have a feast. It's a victory feast. And I think it's kind of interesting that Esther got the knowledge to the king he needed through a banquet.
Mhm.
And now they're having a feast to celebrate their win over their enemies. It's called the Feast of, is it Purim?
Purim or
Purim.
Purim,
All right, tell
depending
us
on
about that
the
feast, because I love it that you grew up. What did you say? You grew up with Jewish
a very
neighbors?
Jewish neighborhood.
Yeah,
The
yeah. So
Gentiles
you
are the
know a lot of the
minority.
stuff. I love that.
I was a Mashuganagori, which means crazy Gentile.
Oh, okay.
I got called
I
that a
don't know
lot.
what that means.
That the Feast of Purim is still celebrated by Orthodox Jews.
Hmm.
And when I was in high school, my best friend was named Esther, and she was a very devout Jew. And she followed a tradition for women named Esther. She would fast for the 3 days of Purim.
Wow.
And today, Purim is considered a children's festival, a children's celebration.
Hmm.
So here's what I remember them doing. The children were given noisemakers, and they were allowed to sit on the front rows in the synagogue.
Mhm.
And one hapless man from the congregation would stand at the podium reading the book of Esther. And every time he reads the name Haman, the children are allowed to use their noisemakers enthusiastically. He smiles, and this is the place they're used to having to be quiet and behave in. This is
Right.
where they get to act like this. Okay, so they're happy. He smiles and he waits for them to settle down, and then he keeps reading. But the name is mentioned more and more often. and the strain on the reader becomes more obvious. Now, the last chapters, Haman's name is in nearly every sentence, and the waiting for the noise to stop each time leaves the reader obviously exhausted with really strained nerves, and everybody else in the room is enjoying his discomfort. So it's a great thing.
So they get to every time. Oh, every time he says the word name Haman. Okay, somehow I had it in my head
Haman's
as
the bad guy.
Esther.
So when you hear that bad guy's name, go ahead, get your noisemakers going.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Yeah, I think people should film that. They probably do, but I haven't seen any of them. But
Oh, that would be, yeah, as a child, I think that'd be a lot of fun.
Mhm.
All right, we're ready to go on to what we can learn from this story, unless you had something else you wanted to add?
Not
No?
right now.
Okay. Okay, the first thing that I saw is that God plays the long game. Now, what do I mean by that? It took more than a year between the time that Esther was removed from her home.
You mean
And,
Vashti? Oh, I'm sorry. You're right, Kim. Sorry. Excuse
yeah,
me.
Esther
Go
was
ahead.
removed from her home and then taken to the palace. It took a full year of them getting beautified. And then she marries the king. We don't know how much, or she becomes queen. We don't know how much time. I don't think the book really tells us exactly how much time transpires, but there's been some time. And now things are starting to happen, but they don't happen in the way that you or I probably would have made them happen.
No.
They happen in God's timing. And for me, that is probably one of my greatest challenges, is to be still and let God be God and let me be the servant. Because God knows the future. I like to look at it like, as humans, we're walking around almost like in a corn maze, where you might be able to see a little bit ahead of you, but you can't see what's around the next corner. But God's got the helicopter view, the drone view, the overhead view. And not only can he see you, but he can also see what's around all of the corners, and he knows what's going to happen. 2 Peter verse 3:8 says, "But beloved, do not forget this one thing, that with the Lord, one day is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day." Now, what that means to me is God doesn't operate on our timetable. I've heard people talk about, what is it going to be like in heaven for eternity, and are we going to know? And the answer was no. There'll be no time in heaven. It will just be forever. And so I think, while we may be frustrated with what's going on or how long it's taking to do something or have something, God has a plan, and he's going to do it on his timing. And our challenge is to be still and know that he is God and he's got it all under control. All right. Did you want to add anything to that, ma'am?
Pretty thorough. You're fine. Keep going.
Okay. The second thing I saw is God uses humble people. Now, when you say overly puffed up, the name Haman comes to mind.
Right.
He thought more of himself than any human should ever. But we've all known, or at least heard of, someone like that. Esther, on the other hand, was very respectful, and she was humble. And I think it's through that humility, when we're able to say, all right, Lord, not only are we going to do this in your time, but we're going to do it your way. And whatever you want me to do, Lord, that's what I'm going to do. It may not be how I planned it out. It may not be how I thought it was going to happen, but it's going to be done your way. And I think, as we look at scripture, every major Bible person that I can think of, from Moses to Abraham to David to even Mary, the mother of Jesus, they all had that humility. And I think it's only when we are willing to be humble and lay our pride and our flesh at the cross and say, Lord, here am I, send me, and be willing to do whatever he wants done, that's when he can use us. Not when we're like, I got it all figured out, and I got this plan, Lord. And like you said, God's sitting up there laughing.
Yeah.
So I think that's really important for us to be humble. All right. Sorry about that. We need to, number 3, we need to remember the amazing things God has already done for all of us. And, the Jews, I think, were really good about that, and teaching their children, and they probably are now. In fact, how was it that, the king found out about the threat to his life and who reported it? By looking in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Mede and Persia. And they wrote it down. They kept, what they say, history will repeat itself. If you're not careful and you don't look back and you don't learn from those lessons, history is going to repeat itself. And I think that is important for us to remember as well, to look back into our lives. Yes, right now at this moment, I may not have everything my flesh desires, but when I look back and see all of the things that God has done for me in the past, the blessings and the answered prayers and the amazing gifts that he has done and favor that he has given me, it makes me humble. It makes me humble because God is just an amazing God and he takes care of us. Years ago when a lot of you probably don't know this, but I spent about 15 years, 16 years, I'm still sort of at the end of it, with an undiagnosed GI problem that left me in chronic pain and bedbound. I lost close to 100 pounds. I went to every doctor on the planet. I know that's sarcasm, but I went to all the major institutions in my area. No one had an answer for me. They just kept saying, "Oh, you had salmonella, so it's just post-infectious IBS. You just have to figure out what you can eat." And the answer for me was, I can't eat anything. And so to write down the things that God was doing in a journal was something that I started to do, and I did for about a year. And I found that journal the other day, and it was just really interesting to go back and look at what I was thankful for. And some days it was just that I woke up, that the sun was shining, that I had a family. Um, and I think that, that helps us all to look back and to be grateful for what God has done instead of constantly looking forward. I think discontentment is one of Satan's greatest tools.
Oh, yeah.
If he can make us unhappy with what we have right now. And I think the answer to that is gratitude, looking back. So, as we leave the story of Esther, I want us all to take away 3 things. Regardless of where we find ourselves in life, God is there. He is with you right now. When we humble ourselves, then God will exalt us, but in due time, in his time. And remembering how God has blessed us in the past will give us the courage that we need to go bravely into the future. To say, you know what, I'm facing this difficult time or this difficult situation, and I don't know how God's going to work it out. But I know that in the past, he has taken care of me, and I fully believe that he will continue to do so until the day that this mortal body doesn't house my soul anymore. So that was the story of Esther. Did you want to add anything to all of that, Miss Pam?
It's just one of my favorites. I just love it. It's God did invent comedy. He invented giraffes and koala bears. He knows how to do comedy, and he uses and he invented us. But we've all known someone similar to a Haman. Most of us had to work for one somewhere along the line. But it is kind of fun to hear a story where one finally gets his comeuppance.
And one of the things that you said early on that I had not realized until we started the study was that the name of God is not said in this book.
Mhm.
It's obvious that the people had faith, but I don't know. I find that interesting that this is this whole story with all these details, and God is clearly there throughout the whole thing.
Oh yeah, I mean he's implied more than spoken of. His name isn't there, but he's implied.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right, ladies. Well, we hope you got as much out of this study as we did because I have thoroughly enjoyed it, and I have a complete new appreciation for our sister a long time ago, Esther, and all that she was able to do. And just remember that your life is important, and maybe you were created for such a time as you're in right now. And be brave and be bold and just count on the Lord to help you through. We love you, and we hope you'll come back and join us another time.